William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Francesco Verso, and I'm the host for this panel. Welcome to the second edition of the FutureCon. Today, we are going to present a panel about the food and the future of the food. And the panel is called Will Food Outsmart Us? And together with me, I would like to introduce you to the panelists. We have Lauren Beukes from South Africa. We have Jana Bianchi from Brazil. We have Lavanya Lakshminarayan from India. And we have Salik Shah from India as well. I am from Italy, so I would like to introduce this panel starting to say that we all come from cultures where food is so important, so deeply rooted in our background, in the way we socialize, in the way we grow. And so my first take would be, of course, to explore the idea of the future in what is the new, let's say, developments lately. You know, we've seen, for example, 3D printed food. We've seen nutraceutics. We've seen even, creation of augmented substances. And all these, of course, has deep consequences on the way the food is produced, on the way our body accept them or rejects them. So it is really something different, because we've seen, for example, a lot of books that extrapolate on some theory of physics, on some artificial things like intelligence or augmentation, but really the stuff that gets inside of us, it's so mysterious. How is it made? And I think this is really something that has not been really explored so deeply in science fiction. So I would like to ask to ask my guest, what idea do they have, and if they have some concept to share with us about the future of food that they see in their cultures or in the books they've read. I'd like to start from Lavanya.
Oh, thank you, Francesco.
Sorry. First, my mistake. I would like first to introduce yourself, okay? And then we start.
Thank you, Francesco. I'm Lavanya Lakshminarayan, and I'm the author of Analog Virtual and Other Simulations of Your Future. I'm currently working on my next book, which is all about the future of food. And where I'm most interested in talking about the future of food is looking at the juxtaposition of the cultures we come from, because food is a product of so many things. There's history to it, there are economic conditions, there are agricultural practices, and each of these is specific to where we come from. But I want to look at how that can coexist with technology. So when you look at things like, growing meat in a vat, or vertical farmlands, what kinds of food make it to these spaces? What determines these? When I think about the way the food industry is structured right now, there is definitely a pecking order, and this is not just a global pecking order. There are pecking orders between cultures as well. Even in India, I'm from the south of India, and there's a different food culture every 100 meters. It depends on the intersection of, caste and class, and religion. And what I want to, when I think of the future of food, I want to see how all of these play out versus technology, especially considering the fact that technology, the way it's being developed predominantly right now, is top down. It's from a corporate point of view. Most of it is for profit. And I think exploring this from this perspective could give us a very new picture on what foods will actually make it and what kinds of cuisine will actually make it.
Thank you, Lavanya. Lauren?
So I am nowhere near as qualified to be on this panel. I'm Lauren Beukes. I'm the author of Afterland and The Shiny Girls and Sioux City. I think the only food relevant point in Afterland, which is about a plague which kills all the men in the world, which men was not an instruction, please go get your vaccines, is that there's a shortage of coffee. And in the book, what happens is that in countries which have been devastated by narco trafficking, for example, the new president of Colombia, who's a woman, is like, okay, USA, we are not sending you another drop of coffee, not another bean, until you legalize drugs and we stop the stupid war on drugs. So that's about as far as I've gotten to food with my books. Cape Town is one of the world capitals for like amazing restaurants. I think we have 2 out of the top 10 restaurants in the world here. I don't know if they've survived COVID, but I didn't get into making sourdough bread. I am very interested in lab-grown meat. And in fact, my favorite question to ask people at dinner parties is, if you could get cloned meat from a celebrity, and no celebrities were actually harmed, and dead celebrities will count if we could get some of their tissue somehow, which celebrity would you eat? What cut of meat would it be? And how would it be served? And I would love to hear people's comments in the comments to like, please tell me about the celebrities you want to eat. I do not want to hear Kim Kardashian rump steak, please. That's very boring.
Wow, that's a very exciting start. Okay, well, since you mentioned coffee, I would like to go to Jana, which just showed us something incredible.
Yes, right before the panel, I showed them that I have like a branch of coffee tattooed in my arm. That's how much I like coffee. I'm Jana Bianchi. I'm an author, editor, translator from Brazil. I have a couple of stories published in English and Lobo de Rua, a book published in Portuguese. In Lobo de Rua, there is a scene that everybody always talk about, that it's like my characters going to the Mercadão, which is the municipal market in São Paulo, to eat lanche de mortadela, which is like a sandwich with some like meat. And I think that I'm also, besides like being editor, translator, author, in a previous life, I was a food engineer. I worked in the food industry for 6 years, and I graduated as food engineer. And food, like producing food, food technology, food science, food engineer is a subject that I love to read about, to study about. And one thing that I always, a couple of years ago, we had like polemics here in Brazil because of politics, I'm not mentioning names, proposed to do a kind of, how to say that, like a dried pellets of food or something like that, to feed homeless people. And it was like everybody, oh, this is really great idea, because then they will have like their nutrients. And then on the other side, I was like, come on, this is not how food works, because food is not only nutrients, it's not only calories. Food is about like flavor, is about culture, is about like not only technology, economics and politics, that is very important in a macro level, but also we need these things to eat something. So then when I see like, especially in old books or in old movies, you know, the pills for the astronauts, I think this is not a way we are going, because people would not like be happy eating pills. So I like to, Francesco asked like, how are we going, or what we can expect from the future and things like that. And I think that the food industry is always looking for ways to make things as caloric or wholesome in terms of nutrients and as possible, but it can't just ignore that we need to have like the flavor and the smell and the texture and all that stuff. And so I think this is one thing that we should, when I think about like future and food, I always think about that. And also, of course, how to produce more food in using less resources, because we're talking about environment too. But I think this is a good way to start. Like we can just reduce food to something that we just need to eat to be alive. This is not how food works. We need to eat to be happy too. So we need to kind of have these two ways, these two factors when we're talking about food. And of course, I think dynamics will change because, of course, we shape food, but food also shape us. So as a society, so I think this is a good start.
Yep, Salik, you also come from a country of great and deep tradition of food.
Yeah, I think everyone has mentioned food serves in multiple function. It's not just there to. I think it's one of our greatest innovation, right? It not only nourishes us, but it also becomes the grammar of our society, right? Something that brings us together, something that binds us, something that is something that can help us bond and also break relationships. And when we look at how food is consumed, the politics of food, it's so complex. I was thinking while I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking of one recent experience. I was traveling, and at this roadside dhaba or restaurant, I saw on the menu grilled sandwich, and I just ordered it without thinking. It's just grilled sandwich, right? And then when I stepped outside of the that air conditioned that dhaba, when I came outside, I couldn't breathe because of the smoke that was being produced by the generator that was being used to to grill that sandwich. And it hit me. Most of the the food industry, the processes are so invisible. We don't really know the amount of pollution that's created when when in the process of growing those crops and also transporting those crops, packaging those crops from one place to another. All of that pollution is almost kind of a given, right? But in this instance, when I saw how that when I saw that smoke, it was kind of direct correlation, right? What I was eating was a kind of polluting the environment. And when you see that, I think it becomes more vital for us to start thinking about the ways how we are eating the planet. I found this interesting quote from, and I felt it could be it was about how we are eating the planet, rather than the other way around, right? How we are kind of cannibalizing on the very resources, the ecosystem that could thrive us, and that has sustained us so far. And when we start thinking about the future of food, I want to kind of also look at not just the utopian vision of the future where we have solved the problems of hunger and starvation with really technologies like replicator. That's too far-fetched in my opinion. But really clean and sustainable ways of creating food, maybe creating food farms on asteroids or underground satellites, or space farms, and also on ocean surfaces. Those are some probable futures that we have. And also the other side of the conflict, the politics of food, where there's an assault going on traditional farming, and there's a need for reform and really develop a sustainable, a clean and healthy way of eating. So those are some of the issues that I explore in my stories and also the stories that I publish.
Okay, thank you. So I will really start to go deep into the conversation, starting to pose some provocative thoughts. We know that the human evolution is probably driven by the efficiency of the food industry, in the sense that the first agricultural revolution created the urbanization, and because of that, we have developed technologies also, right? So in a way, we have experienced a peak when the higher production in food industry, or say in food production, could provide us with quality food and sustain a growing population. I'm not going into now the distribution problem, okay? But now we see that there is an overproduction of food, and most of the people are going away from countries. Think about, for example, China. They moved millions of people out of the country, on the farms, and moved them into the cities. So probably this peak has reached already a point maybe 30 or 50 years ago, I don't know. And now we are experimenting all the bad, side effect of that. So what would you envision, or what would you think could be something to, I don't know, change this thing, or are we on a very bad path, and there's no way that we can turn back? What are the possible choices we have?
Well, I think that climate change is really driving, where we're going at the moment, and that's going to be absolutely devastating. There are predictions that the Western Cape, where I live, in South Africa, the winelands are going to be just completely eradicated because of the growing heat. If we look at the firestorms in California, if we look at like rising seas and the big storms that are hitting everywhere, these are all things which are really going to affect our food security. And I think the other thing we're really going to have to worry about is water security. And that's something, again, I've experienced in Cape Town, where we had the water crisis in 2018, and we were allowed to have 30-second showers and flush the toilet 3 times a day.
Yeah, and just to jump in and add to that, right? We've moved away from growing things that are endemic to certain climates and environments to a lot of GM crops grown everywhere. Barbara Kingsolver has a fantastic book about this. It's called Animal Vegetable Miracle, in which she actually spends an entire year doing all her growing, right? So sustainably farming, growing crops.
Oops. Lavanya, you're muted. Lavanya, you're muted.
I really want to hear everything you want to say. There we go.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Where did you lose me? I think
the wonderful book.
Wonderful
Kingsolver's
book.
book.
Yes, Animal Vegetable Miracle, in which Barbara Kingsolver and her entire family set up an experiment where they live on a farm and grow all their produce for an entire year. And they only grow vegetables and plants that are seasonal. They get meat, I think, from the local farmers market. And they're all growing crops that are endemic to the part of the United States in which this is set. I forget that detail right now. But it is fascinating to see that. It almost seems counterintuitive to what we've always been told about things like GM foods. The entire green revolution, where it was, a faster, more efficient, more technologically forward way to boost productivity and to increase yield. I don't think, of course, hindsight being 2020, now we can look back and say, hey, there are all these repercussions. But I think there lies hope in sort of reverting to something along those lines, where we take into account the natural cycle of growing things and a sustainable way where, if Of course, I'm not talking about professional agriculturists. There's a whole other, supply and demand issue there, and obviously that's what they do for a living. But if all of us can be responsible, individuals and try some rooftop gardening as a very simple experiment, or sort of figure out what plants or what food produce does not take a huge carbon footprint to get to us, and see if we can focus on that. I think that's a bit of hope, but I do agree with you, Lauren. The climate crisis is going to be devastating.
Yeah, I second what Lavanya said, and from a industrial perspective, I think it's obvious, but we, as humanity, we never had to feed so many people at the same time. So we a couple of decades ago, we started to try to solve a problem in a very short-term way, and in a way that seemed logical, which is to produce as much as possible of one food, and as we ended up with big monocultures, and also small things, not small things, but things that at first doesn't seem to affect the food production or the food chain in general, ended up affecting it a lot. So in the United States history, you had an economic problem, and then I don't remember exactly, but they started to feed the cattle with corn, and by the point they started to do it, you kind of had momentum, and then today, I don't know, I don't remember the numbers, but I think 70% of food in the United States have corn DNA to it, because it's or is made with corn, with corn syrup, or with cattle which was fed by with corn. And I think that we need to think and to research things that, as Lavanya said, are not that intuitive, but can be a solution. So not only producing things locally, which of course is a great, it would be the perfect solution if everybody could, not grow. I'm not talking everybody needs to have a farm, but if all communities could have sustainable food chain, it would be perfect, but it's not the case because we overpopulated the planet. So we already crossed the line, so we can't go back to a way that we were producing food in a sustainable way. So of course that would be a great alternative. It is a good alternative in many communities. But also we need to think about different things that doesn't sound intuitive. As an example, I think in a couple of decades, I think maybe in the 40s or in the 50s, 80% of the products we use to eat, vegetables we use to eat, were 30 species. And now 80% of all the vegetables that we eat are 5 species. So that's corn, rice, and things like that. So it seems at first a good way to produce more in order to make more food and feed people. But also we need to have these resources that at first doesn't seem logical, but can lead us to different ways to produce food and feed people. And also Francesco said, I'm not talking about food distribution, but this is one of the biggest problems at all here in Brazil. It's more
not
than
at that moment. We can talk about it.
Okay, yeah. But I think this is a very important point, because sure, as I said, otherwise we'd be overproducing food, and we were not distributing to everybody.
Salik?
I think there's also this, the growing food is also related to taste, right? And we want more, in this era of, we just want to taste the new thing, and I'm heard of celebrities, if I were to eat them, I would eat them alive, those who fly to, another capital just for a taste of, whatever, right, that exotic dish. And I've heard, there's a super luxury, these elites, I don't know, there's so much money that they would go to these, sacred, really environmentally pristine venues, and then they would set up their camp and pollute that with their food, right? And the what I'm saying is, this food, it drives, like, even in cities these days, like, I mean, where do you go out? You go out to eat something, I mean, that was true before the pandemic. And these days, I read somewhere on LinkedIn, like, one of the largest, the traffic jams would be caused by these delivery guys, because we just want to order, everybody is ordering. And when you look at this need to eat, like, and we take it to so much proportion. I love to cook, and I don't even realize that I'm burning, I don't even care, like, where I do care, but like, when you're cooking, no, it's not every day that you wonder where this is coming from, right? Like, how much water was spent to create this one egg. And I mean, if you start thinking about the cost of the exploitative nature of production itself, and like, what the injustices, I mean, if you start thinking about the politics of food, I think you will stop eating. That's from me for now.
Yeah, you mentioned just two very important words there: stop eating. And I'll take you on that thread, because I've been writing a novel which kind of creates nanotechnology that is capable of 3D printing food in a way, a very specific food, in a way addressing the right amount of vitamins, proteins, and carbohydrates that the human needs. So instead of eating 3 times a day, a community of people, some kind of rebels, nerds, they start eating once a month. And that has huge consequences on their work, on their structure of let's say, the way they they don't produce food anymore. They are able to live out of small nuts or little things, leaves, and stuff that grow on the planet, or, as Lavanya said, like rooftop agriculture, small things. But of course, that is set in Rome, so I would have been, crazy to completely remove and cancel the restaurants. It's just that this thing, the social side of food, becomes it gets turned into another experience, which is smell. So the food gets dematerialized, and the people start sniffing, smelling the food, so that they gather together, like they are like smoking like nargile, sitting around the table, and that doesn't change the social part, but there is no food anymore. So my question is, do you think that there might be some radical changes, like in the way we think? Because the planet is not really overpopulated. It's just a matter of distribution, right? We would have a lot of food for everybody if the distribution was correct. So maybe we should give up this old biological need, provided that we substitute it with another pleasure, like we all agree on. I would like to ask you about that. What do you think?
Quick response here.
Oh, sorry, Salik. Yeah, you go.
Yeah, I mean, this whole, this desire to eliminate hunger, let's say, the need for food. I think even if we did that, it's not really about, addressing hunger, right? It's about social control. By denying food, by denying access to food, there's a certain, governments, people are controlling people, like creating economies, right? So it's not just about, even if we had, let's say, a lot of food, what we are doing is effectively, using that. If, like, for example, medicine, if we consider it, let's say, a food, right? We deny that in order to control people. And in this, like, let's say, utopian vision of the future, I think it's not about the production of food. It's more about, like, what ideology, the form of social control, that we have in place, that will determine, like, who gets to fulfill their desires. And food, one of the questions that I saw was, can food be a basic human right? It should be, right? But even when people have that access, let's say, for that basic food, that minimum quota, the quality of food, like how it's prepared, who makes it, what kind of food are they allowed, so all those questions, again, come in the picture. Yeah, Lavanya, you can continue.
Thank you.
Just to jump on board with what you said, Salik, right? Like if food were a basic human right, in my novel Analog Virtual, it is a human right from the point of view that everybody has access to food. The question is, what is the kind and quality of this food? Analog Virtual is about a world that is divided on the basis of access to technology. So based on your worth to society, you are either a virtual with limitless privilege or an analog with very, very basic human rights. And while the virtuals have access to the organic food, fresh food grown on vertical farmlands, the analogs have access to what Francesco was talking about, these nutritive substitutes, protein, I call them Nutropian shakes, and, and none of the analogs like them, but that's all they're given access to because this is a post-climate change world where resources are very scarce. And there's even a bit of a saying in the book, which is, when you've got analog servants on your property, hide the fruit and not the technology, because that's how much of a scarcity fresh food is. So I think, I think it will be interesting if we can see a world in which, should what Francesco has said happen, right, where let's say we move towards producing sort of these uniform food substitutes or nutritive pills or what have you, I wonder if that will be evenly distributed. And I wonder if, a corporation won't swoop in and create exclusive culinary experiences for the people who can afford it, but exclude all the others.
Well, in my story, this is really bottom up in the sense that this is a copyleft. It's peer-to-peer. It's 3D printed among communities. So let's say it's a solar punk scenario. So of course, it's against the actual system of centralization of all the let's say procedures and industries. So I would like to take you on another path here. Oh, sorry, but maybe Lauren or Jana, you want to add something to this? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a couple of points, but I will do it like quick. One of the things I wanted to recommend books from an author called Michael Pollan. He's a journalist and he writes about food, and his books are like amazing. And I think it's in the Omnivore's Dilemma. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. And he talks about how they made like a poll to see like how many people actually prepares their food and how many people watch food reality shows. And they saw that like a lot of people, most people don't cook their foods. They either like buy food like already cooked, or they go to restaurants. But they love to watch like food being prepared and people cooking and things like that. And I think that would be an interesting point about this idea of like having this already synthesized food or something like that, because I think that a good part of the experience of eating is also choosing food, that I go to what Salik said, and also preparing food. And also I think that it's important to think that I like how you put that this is going to be done in a small community, because like choosing food and producing food and eating food is very heterogeneous around the world, and even inside countries and inside communities. So I think like everything is possible if you talk like about not really small communities, but if you talk about like parts of the society doing one thing and another. And I think like I agree on Lavanya on like being distributed, but also on like being a choice, because if you choose to not eat, if you choose to eat this synthesized food or 3D printed food, and also have this social and sensorial experience of sniffing the food, that would be totally okay, because this is how it works, as an example, with like people who doesn't eat meat. So they choose not to eat meat. It's not that there is no meat available or any other food. So I think this is a I always say that like eating is a social, political, cultural experience, and it starts when you choose to buy something and where to buy something or to produce something if you're doing like by yourself. So I think this is a good point to think about.
Just a quick recommendation. There's a story by Shukanya Datta in which she basically turns the humans into plants. What if we could like recharge, turn like the sunlight into fuel to sustain ourselves, and it's amazing, like I mean it solves the problem of hunger, right? We want to eat to
Can you write down the because that's what I wrote. That's the second book. The people turn artificial photosynthesis, so they completely are autonomous and independent from the grid, any grid, the grid of food, the grid of energy, the grid of housing. So they start to be nomads. Yes, Lauren, please.
My question at the beginning about what cloned celebrity would you eat and how do you have it prepared? I think it'd be great if we could be entirely self-sustaining, but if, so I could like scrape off a little bit of, I don't know, my inner cheek and grow myself into a steak. So kind of an auto-cannibalism might be useful, but it would be even better if I could grow like vegetables out of my shoulders and just, so Jana has a coffee plant on her shoulder. What if that could be an actual coffee plant growing out of you? So we could all become our own little factory farms, because I got to tell you, I don't have time to garden. I barely have time to cook. And if we do have 3D printers at home and replicators, which, as we said, is probably like very unlikely for a long time, I wouldn't just want like a piece of meat to appear or beetroot. I would want a fully cooked meal. I would want to be able to download the latest ottolenghi recipe and it arrives fully cooked and then ideally just disappears. So I don't have to do the dishes either, please. That would be my dream future of food. And obviously everyone does not starve and everyone is not hungry, and it is a basic human right.
Yeah, so Lauren, you said another very important word, which is I don't have time. So time is directly related to food. I remember my grandmother was cooking 4 dishes, an Italian traditional meal. My mother was probably doing 2. I'm doing probably 1 single plate. And my daughter is probably going to fast food. That is, a compression of time dedicated to producing, storing, transforming, disposing food. Okay, we compress this all to probably enlarge the work or entertainment activities. So, is it right? I mean, is this the correct amount of time that we have allocated to our life? Probably slow, we have the movement of slow food, a huge movement all over the world. But of course, it doesn't compensate the growth of the fast food, which is driven by the industry. So I see these 2 forces. There are people that are accelerating and other people that are decelerating. Where do we meet?
So if I can pick up again, I think where that should be is communality. So I moved from a house into an apartment, and I moved next to some very good friends of mine in the very first lockdown, and we would take turns cooking. And that was so lovely. And I think communal plots work so very well, where it's not just you gardening and killing your tomatoes because you don't know what the hell you're doing, but you have other people getting involved and being like, oh, no, don't do that. How about this? And to share that knowledge and I think that is the joy of food. And like so much of the pleasure is not just the texture and the taste and being startled by, a flavor combination. And I think of Douglas Copeland's Girlfriend in a Coma, where this woman comes out of a coma after 18 years or whatever it is. And she's asking them what has changed. And they're like, oh my God, you don't understand what has happened to food. Food has become amazing, because suddenly we have all these different influences. And I'd love to see like more of that happening. And I think that's, if I think of an ideal future and a utopian future, I think of us kind of working together and having communities. And I don't know why there are old age homes but not young people homes. Like, why don't we have communal living facilities where we can all share and we can all kind of build a neighborhood essentially, but to really kind of share with everyone else and build together and cook together and grow things together.
I think we can't talk about like time without talking about capitalism. So I think this is not a problem of like, oh, how many time we need to dedicate, because it's not a real choice, an actual choice for most of people. It's like we need to produce, so everything is around work. So and also food is very related to work. So like food, what people eat is very related to what kind of work they used it to do a couple of decades ago. So I think that's like, it's most, if you talk about like small communities, when the way of the relationship between people is different, and we will like have different like priorities. And I think, of course, it's not like that, like everybody needs to take a lot of time cooking, because this is not, it worked like before when you have like more smaller communities. You have people who are dedicated to produce food, have people dedicated to cook food, and have people dedicated to, I don't know, make shoes. So you kind of, I think it's like, of course, you always have like this affectivity way to look at like producing food, because you're talking about family, you're talking about like culture also. But I think that's, we can talk about changing this pattern of how much time we dedicate to cook and eat or whatever, if you don't talk about the dynamics of work and using your time. So I think this is, and I love it, because I think it's like two very things that we do every day, and we sometimes don't correlate one thing to the other, but they are really united.
I just want to make a quick comment. Like, I think I love cooking, and someone who works like almost like 9-10 hours a day in front of a screen. For me, the physicality of cooking, there's some like there's a kind of a meditative quality to it, that like chopping onions like into fine pieces, that becomes it's a wonderful like activity. And I also feel there's a like phases of the kind of, I hated cooking, then I love cooking, and there's I think there's also like, just like we read different books at different times of our lives, there are different foods in different like in different situations, right? And I think it's rather than saying which is right or wrong, I think all food needs to have as low carbon footprint as possible. It needs to be clean, it needs to be exploitation free, it has to be like really the ideal of what we want to achieve as a society. But at the same time, like in what form does it come, like that's a very different and I think it just depends. I will give people total freedom in what they want to eat, but the means of production has to be right. And no one should be forced to eat something that they don't want or like. And in India, like some foods are restricted because of politics, because of religion. So even the food security, food right, there's a whole debate. And if we start imposing like what is fast food and what is not, if you look at the quality of even the so-called traditional meals, like it has really gone down, right? So like what is junk and what is not, even those definitions are really changing fast.
All right. Anybody wants to add something to this? Okay. We have a lot of questions, really, but I don't know where to start, because we have many. Well, say some people ask about, for example, why can cities be self-sustaining foraging ecologies? Let's say that many of these questions are related to what is a growing phenomenon lately in science fiction, which is solar punk, which is advocating a sort of sustainable society, new ways of production, communities taking care of themselves, becoming self-sustainable in their nutrition, in the way they produce food, in the way they grow their own themselves and their children. So have you ever read, or have you ever thought about writing solar punk? Do you think that solar punk is something that might be affecting the science fiction scene as it is already, but maybe going and becoming something more deeply rooted in our imagination, like it was, for example, cyberpunk for the 80s and 90s? Anybody?
If I may jump in, can you all hear me? I hope you can.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I think there's a lot of hope as far as writing solar punk goes, and in terms of it informing and maybe inspiring an entire generation's worth of ideas in a similar way that cyberpunk did. And especially when it comes to food and focusing on communities, which is something I think Lauren emphasized, and so did Jana and Salik as well. I think our future lies in coming together as communities, and these don't necessarily need to be enormous communities. These could just be an entire neighborhood working together towards food security or sustainable energy. I think there are a number of reasons why this has not taken place yet, and why, as I would say across cultures, we are being conditioned to continually isolate and focus on ourselves as individuals. And I'm not talking about the pandemic at all. I'm talking about pre-pandemic, when there is so much emphasis on your individual productivity coming, all the way to you from our capitalist overlords, and what that means for our ability to go out and form meaningful connections and take up projects that we can work on together. Because, I think Salik mentioned food delivery. We're getting used to an entire system that pretty much puts us in front of our laptops, because everything arrives at your doorstep and you don't really need to know or care about who's delivering it, where it comes from, what sort of distribution led to it getting to your door. And this is, regardless of whether it's food or anything else that you're consuming. So I think solar punk has this immense potential to sort of spark the imagination and make us think beyond ourselves, which is something, I think the vast majority of the things that we consume tell us to continue to focus on ourselves as me, the individual. So yeah, I'm really excited about solar punk, and I would love to write some.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I've been obsessed with the idea of arcologies, right? I mean, really huge, architecture, right? Mega buildings, mega structures, which can hold the entire, in 1 million, 2 million, 10 million people, in one structure. And in those structures, it's almost like a mini Earth, let's say, almost like a spaceship. And I'm imagining, the future would be, entire cities, have that self-enclosed, self-sustainable, ecosystem, including food production, and also the division of labor, including high tech. How do we use our technology to solve the problem of creating, distributing, serving food in a just and in an ideal manner? So again, there are solar punk, there are many ideas, but I still feel what's missing is those optimistic visions of the future. In one of my stories, which is coming from future fiction, the architecture of loss, I talk about this self-healing, regenerating architecture, buildings, and we could also extend that to the food which can grow itself. I mean, like imagine like a world where we know what we want to eat, like throughout our like 1 year, and there's a small mini garden or factory for each individual, and we grow our own thing. I mean, it's on autopilot, it's running, and there's no need for transport, there's no need, the whole debate goes away. Yeah.
Okay. One quick thing, I think that we sometimes think about like going back to the past in the future, and I think that of course we can go back to some, I don't know, techniques or even ways of organizing a society. But I always like to remember when I'm thinking about stories or planning things that happen in the future, is that some lines were crossed. I'm not talking only about like overpopulating the country, but as an example, when they talk about like foraging, of course it could be possible, but many species of plants and of course animals were domesticated by men, and they don't happen anymore in the wild. So the corn is an example. It doesn't happen in the wild. We can't like I don't know, just leave the corn there and they will grow by itself. So I think it's an interesting thing. I always like to think about it, because of course we can, many things that we use it to do before some technological and political and economical revolutions, or would be like a nice alternative for today. But we also need to think that we are talking about like a word that we don't know yet. It's not like the word we knew, in the past. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, but I remember you wrote a story on Clarke's World that was about some Brazilian recipe. Am I right, Jana?
Yeah.
Right?
There's some mentions about like recipes and things like that.
Yeah, and the thing is, we can store the receipts from the past through stories, of course, but there are ways to de-extinct some things like corn, for example, or seeds. So there are processes of de-extinct some extinct species at the moment. So what you probably are thinking is rewinding the future and trying to reload the past, trying to take it into another path, into another direction. I'm not talking about an alternative reality, but I'm talking about a science fiction, rewinding.
Like rebuilding the line, yeah.
Yes. So this is possible. I mean, some people mention
totally.
the Svalbard Island, where there is a seed vault, which is being built in view of an environmental catastrophe, so that we might have access to these seeds. So this is also something that we could think about, to give, and maybe this seed could be 3D printed, So which are the good ways, for example, to use technology, to give it to the people and to give open access to these kind of technologies that could improve the quality of life. Do you have any examples of this? Yeah, Lauren, do you want to jump in?
Well, I just want to come back to my full body horror, where you're just growing everything out of yourself, and I just want to have multiple seeds inside, sprouting out of my body, and be able to like manufacture them inside me. Please.
Why not? I like it.
Completely.
I love it.
Yeah. But Francesco, about you have talked, I think it's interesting, because sometimes I feel that we started to make like evolution faster than it was. At the moment we started to select species, but it's still an evolution. So we of course can have like, I totally agree with you that we can go, we can engineer species to be like they were in the past. I think it's totally possible. It is, for me, still a kind of evolution, but we also can like engineer things to be different based on all the situation of the
mistakes.
world. Yeah, yeah, the mistakes, exactly. So I think this is an important point, because I think that's we tend to see food technology. When we talk about food industry, you have like a huge problem, because it's an industry and it's like based on profit. So this is the main problem. But the science and the engineering related to creating new things and everything, this is not the main, this is not the main problem. This is not something inherently bad. This is something that is used to make people earn more
Yeah.
money. So this
Yeah.
is totally sucks. But when I talk about like changing things and making things different, we can do it like in a way that it's like beneficial or something like that. So I like it also when technology, especially technology related to food, is also not seen as something that is so human like, that it's like there's no value to it. I think that we can even like make things, we can even start to work closer with nature using our science, our technology, or things like that.
Salik, Lavanya,
Yeah.
who wins?
So
Yep.
yeah. So I mean, there's this whole concept about like we should have our own gardens, we should farm, and I tried that, and it's so difficult, and they don't grow, when you want to eat them, and even when you need space, and it's so little, right? It's like, and you have a family, friends, and like it's just like and I've tried to sort of visit farmers, and I've friends who are into this whole sustainable agriculture, food farms, community farming, and all those cooperatives, right? And I think the even there's Bandana Shiva's Earth University in India, right? And she's quite big, and there's like, so I've kind of visited, seen those places, and hung out with these let's say people as well, people as in like, and they seem to be a different breed altogether, and they seem to be kind of like one view is that they are running away from the modern society, and this this going back to the roots, to the way things were before. It almost seems that's the only way we can restore the environmental balance, prevent the ecological disaster. But I feel that's not really an honest view, right? I think we need to also look at we need to, again, like, I mean, use agriculture was an innovation, right? Agriculture is a technological innovation during its time, and it hasn't changed for thousands of years. It hadn't changed for thousands of years, right? And now finally in the last 200 years we've started changing how we produce, how we look at agriculture, and this is a transitional period, phase we're going through right now. And I think for those young kids and writers, I think there's a need to kind of really look deeper into what is it that we're doing, and what is the future, what is the answer for our times. That's it, I guess.
That's a big thing. Lavanya.
Oh, I'm really glad Salik mentioned Vandana Shiva. She's a climate activist. She's a food security activist. She has some fantastic books if anyone's interested in reading about food security from an Indian perspective. Who Really Feeds the World? A recent book. Really enjoyed that. Very deep. And I think there's a lot of merit into looking into what how these people are practicing that, because I agree with Salik. It's a lot of stress to grow your own food, to maintain a garden. It's quite intense. I have a story coming out at the end of this month where it relies on that seed vault in Svalbard, and those seeds in the far future, and this is, we've colonized space and all of that, and the earth is a big raging mess. But we have these tiny little expandable terrariums with microclimates in them. So it's very sort of push of a button and this thing kind of engineers and grows out, and you can actually use that to grow your plant of choice. The science, of course, is a bunch of like hydroponics and all of that, and I'm making all of this up. But the focus of that story is coffee, which I think we all love here. And again, it's rooted in the South Asian context in the south of India. Coffee is really important culturally. Like we all wake up and we knock back 3 cups of coffee and then we're good. From my grandmother on. Yes.
I thought it was more tea.
Oh, I think that's in the northern half of India. The southern half is full coffee. So my 8-year-old grandmother will, throw back some really strong coffee first thing in the morning. And I think, if we can sort of work out those links, right, where of course it is privilege, it's a privilege to say this is important to my culture and I want to retain it and keep it, because a lot of people will not have that kind of privilege. But it would be so fascinating to try and sustain a little bit of these things that we associate with our identities, but to figure out technology and solutions that can make them withstand the test of time through the climate crisis and possibly into the far future I write about in the story.
All right. I might go to take some of the questions, but the chat is exploding. I can't follow anymore, really. Let me see if there's some question there. But really, one of the things that I'm interested in is also the relationship between food and land. Okay, because this is really important. As Jana said, probably there's nothing wrong with food production. The problem is who owns the means of production and how do you do that? Because probably the communities of farmers or the associations between towns and villages could provide themselves solidarity and help, especially in famine times. So the problem of capitalism accelerated all these differences and inequalities, right? So much so that a third of the world is obese and a third of the world is starving, and we see these huge differences. And some people are throwing hundreds and hundreds of food all over the world, really, and some others are really trying to gather the food from the rubbish and stuff like that. So there's really something that really needs to be changed, and that just in 100 years, right? But if it was just 100 years, we could change it. So I am asking you, what would you do? Salik, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in kind of anonymous data. I think we need to really have the world population on a database, and we need to really predict how much cloth they need, what kind of habitation, how much food they need. And I think there are apps which can suggest you a new meal, a new cuisine every day. So based on your local whatever taste, you can fill in that app can predict the entire food that you would need in a year, in a month, or even a lifetime, let's say. And that would help us really organize, because it's all about organization, right? And if we can predict how much food each and every individual needs, each and every community needs, then we can really make this whole system really efficient. And it's not just about food production, it's about really using our planet in a way which is sustainable, without letting any single individual starve.
But we know this. We have this information. We know how much is necessary in terms of water,
but
of air,
the policies. Yeah, Francisco. I think we have just started ordering food online. like especially in countries like India. I mean, internet is still just penetrating. It has just, so I mean, like around 40% of the world population is still offline, right? So it's a matter of like how do we connect everyone, how do we bring them online in a way that like not in a way that there's this big brother watching them, controlling every move like in China, but how can we sort of that anonymous blockchain view where yes, you are on this public ledger, but there's also this privacy. So there's a I think there's a kind of a evolution happening here, and I believe there's a, I mean, as technology progresses, we will see those visions. We'll see those apps, app-based solutions, coming in like demand, serving the needs of our city. Starting with the city, neighborhood, the whole. Even the cooperatives have been inefficient because they don't know, right? They can't reach the customers, right? So even these amazing ideas which have failed in the last 50 years, I think they can also use the technology, harness the power of technology to really spread and become feasible.
I think there's also a huge like political problem. Francesco, you talk about like land, and right now, as an example, in Brazil, we're going through a huge problem regarding native people lands. They are trying to, this is ridiculous, they are trying to do a law that says that native people need to prove they were in the earth, in the land before like 1988. It's like ridiculous, makes no sense, but yes. And this is of course a very political stuff.
Action.
And also and also in Brazil, we also have like the landless rural workers movement, which is a social movement of workers that take lands that are not used to produce food. And people don't know, because people, a couple of decades ago, they started to talk in the media and in community in general, talk about these people as, like people who want to make, just like steal land from people. This is ridiculous. But nobody, not nobody, but many people don't know that this movement is one of the movements that produces the highest amount of food in Brazil for Brazilian population in general. So I think there's this, and of course this always goes back to money and to profit and to things like that. So I totally agree with Salik. I think we need to have like to make use of this technologies that we have now about intelligence, about like making projecting data and things like that. But I also think that for everyone who is trying to solve a problem, like who is truly trying to solve a problem, there's a lot of people who don't want to have this problem solved because they will like lose money and power and things like that. So I think we're always going back to that. And that's why I like to talk about like small communities, small groups of people doing things like from themselves. That's how the landless rural works movement in Brazil works. They have like small farms. It's very fascinating. I recommend you to look to read about it. They have like whole communities. They have like school. All the kids are in school. All the kids have health treatment. All the persons in this community. This is a like really good community. And yeah, but this is not interesting for the guys who want to produce soy in huge.
Just want to quickly jump in there. I think there's also this movement towards high-tech villages. Like, I mean, there's a whole movement. Like, I mean, huge cities maybe are not the solution, right? And maybe this small high-tech, small self-sufficient units, like small house, that has solar, that has a small garden. Maybe that's the future that we are heading towards. And there's small villages with technology, which I mean, I'm at some like rural area. I feel I'm not in Delhi right now, and I'm still, talking to you. It's a revolution, and I don't think I need anything. There's a forest, behind me, and I'm just enjoying it. And this, I can see, people working in their fields, but I mean, they, for them, the income difference is such a huge thing, right? I mean, and I don't want to get into that thing, but I'm just saying, high-tech villages, might be a solution, and cities are definitely, going to change, and maybe there will be gardens, on rooftops everywhere. Every house will have a, small garden, just like, they have a kitchen or a, bathroom, today.
Lavanya, you want?
I think, yeah, I think, a lot depends upon viewing the people who actually produce our food with respect and offering them the dignity of labor, which I think a lot of cultures do not do. That there are constantly policies and laws being passed in India that do not enable farmers to have rights. And I think, if we're talking immediate future, we need to start with addressing this, because these are the people who are feeding the world, and across farmlands all over the world. And right away, we need to respect the fact that if that food is not grown, we're unlikely to have anything to eat, unless, of course, Francesco's nanotech solution comes into being, which it could. I'm just not sure how immediately. But I do also think, we need to look at how we're growing what we're growing. In Analog Virtual, I do write about vertical farmlands, and I know, they exist, but can we create them on a more widespread scale? Can we have them belong to cityscapes? Can people be introduced to work on them, and introduce a culture of tending the land from a really early age? I would have loved it if that could have been done in school, for example. And I had a deeper connection with the earth. Growing up in a city, it's really challenging. And I think those would be positives that I would love to see emerge.
My problem with these technologies, which are kind of being advocated by the current global industry, of nutrition, food industry, like vertical farming, for example, or also digital agriculture. Think about seeding with drones. Think about the blockchain applied to tracking food origin and stuff like that, to certify the quality of the food. Is it really that we are again choosing for the technology again? We're always in the same kind of updating the current state of the industry to a higher state of complexity. But maybe, we need to balance that, and that's why I'm not advocating primitivism in the sense of going back, to a previous kind of life or nutrition, but a sort of balance in the way that we need to have the ownership of the way that we produce, and we need to have the information about the food that we ingest, because what gets in, it's probably what is going to feed us, but it's also probably what is going to kill us, right? So we need more information on that, and that's why I think the science fiction has a role in these, because as explorers of these landscapes, we can imagine the good and the bad side of this, right? So a food apocalypse or a food utopia, and I'd like to ask you also about that. I mean, have you ever thought about writing something in that field? I mean, you have already, but are you going to probably develop something with these new technologies?
I would love to.
I think we would all love to. I guess we would all love to.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure this is really exciting because, we're talking about the baseline for whether the human race continues to exist or not, because you cannot exist without food. So I know personally, I love food. I don't, I'm not often in the kitchen a lot because I don't get the time to cook as much as I'd like, but I enjoy the process. And I do, I think Jana mentioned earlier, all the reality TV shows. I watch MasterChef and tell myself I'm doing research for my next book, right? So it's legit. And so I would absolutely love to write this. And the story I mentioned earlier as well, there are a ton of themes in it, but food and the culture of food is one of them. And it's out in the Golan's Book of South Asian Science Fiction, releasing at the end of the month, in case people want to read that. Tons of amazing South Asian writers in there. And I want to continue writing about our food future and what it could mean 50 years out, 100 years out, 300 years out.
I'd be very keen to write my kind of just us sprouting all our own stuff from ourselves. And yeah, I think it'd be really fun.
Do that.
I know. I think it'd be.
Yeah, I am like waiting for it.
Yeah, I'm not much of a utopian girl. I have to tell you though, my stuff is pretty dark, but we'll see.
I know.
I think this theme, like the future of food, and also like biopunk, elements of solar punk, they all sip in like our work, right? Because it's a melange. There's so many ideas hitting us from so many different, and while we're building the stories, while we're writing it, there's a scene where the character has to eat, and the situation, the world defines that, our choice, right, as writers, and also our ideology. What do we want, this character to stand for? And I feel like, we use food to root the character in a certain culture, certain geography, certain place, and I think even if we don't want to, food will always be. I think we don't want to, right? But food is still part of our life. Let's say, and it's so boring sometimes. You eat the same thing, twice a day. I don't know, so many times a month. So same thing, that guy drinking coffee in the Expanse, for me is boring. Get a life, bro. Drink something else. I don't know, and there's also a question of addiction, right? We romanticize this need for, herbal tea in my case, or I don't know, and I feel, that dependency and portraying it as something, that's part of our culture. And I feel, that's very, again, dangerous, right? We don't even realize what we're doing to the environment, or, the whole mode of production, right? And so I feel there are, even if you mention, that guy drinking coffee, you've already implied so much, you've already revealed so much about your world, from where you come. So I feel even if we don't want to, we can, I discovered this wonderful book on food, on the politics of food. I'm going to share that link in a moment. It's wonderful, study on food as a language, food as so many things.
If I can just quickly add, I know we're going to be closing off really soon, but I think what we really need is community, which we've talked a lot about, and I think imagination. And if I think about Interstellar and how they went on and on and on about how much we need farmers, and so many scientists who watched that were like, and food technologists. So I think we need imagination, and we need to think bigger, and I think we need to think more socially and about what we owe to each other.
Okay, so I think we are almost there, and I would like to have a final round talking about food rituals. Okay, for example, in Italy, that's my experience. We have, long tables, but when I went to China, I experienced the round table. So the ritual in our let's say food let's say experience is I face one person in front of me and the others are along the table. But in China, I can face everybody. So it's more like a rounding experience, really sharing better. And also you take the food from the single point in the center, while we have our own dish. It's like it's mine. So how do you have any kind of ritual in your culture that you want to share with us? Something particular, peculiar, something your own?
I have a very sad one, which is in South Africa. We have Heritage Day in December. And the whole idea is to celebrate, we have 11 national languages. We have, it's a colony. We had the original people who were the Khoisan, and then we had the Bantu people who came in, and then we had Malay people who came in mostly as slaves, and of course the European colonialists. And we're supposed to all come together and celebrate our different kinds of heritage and kind of come together in Ubuntu. And that day has become Braai Day, which means barbecue. So Heritage Day has become Barbecue Day because apparently that's the only thing we can agree on as South Africans, is that we all like meat on a fire.
All right. That counts.
Yeah. In Brazil, we have feijoada. I think this is the closest we have to... No, I think we have like several rituals, but I like feijoada. This is one that is very important in my family. And it's like a bean stew with pork meat. I don't eat meat, but we still do like one with pork meat, another without pork meat. But the main thing about it is that you can't do a small amount because it needs to cook. The bean, we usually cook the bean in the pressure cooker. However, for feijoada, you don't cook it in pressure cooker. So we cook it. When my mom do it, she put all the like salt meats to in the water to be like less salty the day before, and she starts cooking it during the night, and then she wakes up like really early and keep cooking until like lunchtime. And you only can do it like in really big amounts, like a big cauldron. She has a cauldron only to make like feijoada. And also when we eat in a very Brazilian way, which is like you sit wherever you can because there's lots of people in the house, so there's no place for you to sit in the table. Of course, there's a table, but like there's a couple of people sat on the table, and all the other people are like in the garden or in the couch. And then we kind of do in my feijoada is a food to eat when it's like winter time or close to winter time because it's too has a lot of grease in it and a lot of fat. So my birthday is on late April, which is starting to get cold here in Brazil. So my birthday we always do like the feijoada, and then I, as a birthday girl, I kind of go with my plate, like to talk with somebody here, and then I'm eating, and then I go and talk to the guys in the garden, and then goes and sit with some friends in the couch and things like that. So I think this is also it comes from a sad history too, because it's a stew that was used to make by enslaved people here in Brazil too, because we do it with not the good part of the pork meat. Do it with the nose, the ears, the tail, or the feet of the pork, of the pig. But it's a really important ritual and culture here.
Cool.
I invite you to after pandemics.
Yeah, Francisco.
Yeah, it's like up to you.
So in my story, again, the architecture of loss, I describe. So I mean, we have like India. I mean, I think every culture has festivals, and food is the ultimate goal, right? I mean, that's what we look forward to eating. I mean, and every festival has a certain sort of dish, attached to it. And I grew up in Kathmandu, and Kathmandu is said, we have like 365 festivals in a year. I mean, like every day there's something going on, and like I mean, there's a variety of food, and in that particular story, the architecture of loss, I describe a family eating a goat, and it's almost while even writing that scene, describing that scene, it almost felt like how closer we are to animals. Like we're not that different, right? We look at ourselves and we kind of separate us from an entire species that we've condemned as food, right? And then kind of, it's like it's really, I mean, we forget that we are animals, we are predators, and I think food, sort of, reminds us, right? Stories about food, they remind us of our organic nature, this, the biological need to eat, but we've turned it into a huge, like, I mean, there's this culture is artificial thing, which are put on it to make it sound, morally, justified. Even like, plants, they might have consciousness. Even plants, they might feel pain, right? We don't know their language. We don't know the language of plants. We don't know the language of animals. And so, I mean, once you kind of sort of, start thinking about the earth as one unified, conscious system, then, like, what do we eat? What's left to it, and what is the way to, the proper or the correct, way to eat? I mean, those deep questions again, like, start popping up. But again, like, I mean, like, I think I do Vipassana meditation, which is kind of, going deeper. I don't know much. It just says, going deeper. I don't know what it means, but I think the future of food, will food outsmart us? Yes. We are who we are because of the food that we eat, right? The meat consumption, right? The oil, I mean, food is the ultimate, like the earliest invention, let's say. Language, is another, right? And that's what we have become. We are what we have become because of the food that we have invented over centuries. And yes, food will outsmart us again in the future, because it's continuously, evolving as we evolve, as it's a like this whole conversation, right, between the nature and who we are as it's I don't know, children, I guess.
So you're saying that we will have post food as we have post humans, right?
Yes, I think that's definitely where we're headed.
Okay.
Unless we are the food.
Yes. Lauren, there's a story, right? Are we made of meat? They're made out of meat. There's a story, right? Very short story. They're made out of meat.
Yeah,
Lauren, I'm sorry for disrupting.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, for all we know, we're the turkeys having our happy life, kind of pecking around, not knowing that Thanksgiving is coming, to use an American cultural reference.
Yeah.
And the aliens are just waiting to come in and reap the harvest.
So, Lavanya, you closed it with some ritual you want to mention?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's part of a larger ritual, yes. But I'm from the southern part of India, and I'm Tamilian. That's from a state in South India. And we eat a lot of rice, and we eat rice with, various forms of stew, for the lack of a better word. And my favorite of all of these is called rasam. It's made with, lentils and tomatoes and tamarind, and with this super secret powder, right? And this is ground fresh. And it's usually, mums and grandmoms have the recipe to the secret ingredient. And just this morning, my mom sent me an entire box filled with all these various powders that go into, seasoning and making rasam, and another version which is heavier on the lentils. It's called sambar. And these are, traditional foods. This is home cooking. And the second I opened up that box and the aroma hit me, it was a wave of nostalgia. It was a wave of, motivation, wanting to go into that kitchen and make my own lunch. And it also, I'm not sure if she timed it, but it was really fascinating to me, because I thought, we're going to be talking about the future of food today. How is it ever going to compete with this feeling? How is any amount of technology going to replicate this? And fun fact, the next book I'm writing was actually inspired by, my grandmom's rasam. It's what we eat when we're unwell, because it's hot and it's spiced. and I was really sick, and I wrote it, and this idea for this book came to me, and and so yeah, on that note, how will the feeling of food stack up against technology and sustainability, and will we be able to hold on to it? I think that's
all right. All right. Thank you. It was really a wonderful conversation.
Made us all hungry.
Yeah, and I hope one day, not very far, we will all meet and eat our own, dishes and food. The wonderful recipe that you mentioned. Thank you very much. I'll see you, and we'll see each other in the next panel for the FutureCon. Remember, you can subscribe to the newsletter. You can watch all the other panels following a website, and you can also donate any amount of money that you feel like, because the FutureCon is free. But of course, to support the team and work out all the people behind it, we accept any donation. Feel free. Thank you very much, and see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Ciao.
guys. See you.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.